She offered to help him for free, but what he didn't know was that the doctor treating his PTSD had lost her own husband in combat. And now, both their worlds are about to collide in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The afternoon sun filtered through the dusty windows of Thompson's Auto Repair, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Jake Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, leaving a smudge of grease above his eyebrow. His calloused fingers worked methodically on the old Chevy's engine, finding comfort in the familiar routine of nuts, bolts, and metal. The quiet hum of the shop's fluorescent lights and the occasional clink of tools against metal were the only sounds that filled the space. Jake preferred it this way. The silence helped keep the memories at bay, most of the time. The shop's bell chimed, and quick footsteps echoed through the garage. Jake didn't need to look up to know it was Lily. Her presence always brought a different kind of energy to the otherwise still atmosphere. "Dad!" Lily's voice rang out, full of the enthusiasm that only a 10-year-old could muster after a full day of school. "I got an A on my science project." Jake straightened up from the engine, his joints protesting slightly. He managed a small smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "That's great, sweetheart." He reached for a clean rag to wipe his hands. "Did you remember to thank Mrs. Peterson for helping you with the research?" Lily bounced on her toes, her backpack swinging with the movement. "Yep. And guess what? She said mine was the best in the class." Her eyes sparkled with pride as she set her backpack down and reached for the broom that stood in the corner, part of their daily routine. Jake watched as his daughter began sweeping, her small hands gripping the oversized broom with determination. She hummed, while she worked, a habit that reminded him so much of her mother, it made his chest ache. "The floor's not going anywhere, Lily Pad," he said softly, using the nickname that had stuck since she was a toddler. "Take it easy." She slowed her pace but continued humming, working her way around the various tools and parts scattered across the floor. Jake turned back to the engine, but his focus had shifted. The familiar weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders. The constant awareness that he wasn't doing enough, wasn't being enough. A sudden clatter made Jake jump, his heart racing as his body instinctively tensed. It was just a wrench Lily had accidentally knocked over, but his mind had already transported him elsewhere, to a place of explosions and chaos. His hands gripped the edge of the car, knuckles white as he fought to stay present. "Sorry, Dad." Lily's voice cut through the fog, anchoring him back to reality. "I didn't mean to." Jake forced himself to take a deep breath, then another. "It's okay," he managed, though his voice was rougher than before. Just be careful." Lily's face fell slightly, recognizing the change in her father's demeanor. She picked up the wrench carefully and placed it back on the workbench, her movements deliberately quiet now. The humming had stopped. They worked in silence for the next hour, Jake focusing on the engine while Lily tidied up the shop. It was their routine, comfortable in its familiarity, but heavy with all the things left unsaid. As the day began to wind down, Jake closed up the shop, double-checking the locks while Lily waited patiently by his truck. The drive home was quiet, punctuated only by Lily's occasional comments about school and friends, conversations that Jake acknowledged with nods and brief responses. At home, Jake heated up leftover casserole for dinner, another one from their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, who seemed determined to keep them well fed. Lily chatted about her upcoming school play while they ate, but Jake found himself struggling to follow her words. His mind kept drifting, fragments of memories mixing with present moments. After helping Lily with her homework and making sure she was settled in bed, Jake found himself alone in the kitchen. He pulled a beer from the fridge and sat heavily at the kitchen table, his body feeling twice its age. His eyes fell on the photograph propped against the windowsill. Sarah's smile beamed back at him, frozen in time. She looked so alive in that picture, taken at the beach during their last vacation together. Her hair was windblown, her eyes crinkled with laughter as she held a 3-year-old Lily in her arms. Jake took a long pull from his beer, the cool liquid doing little to ease the tightness in his throat. The guilt rose up like a physical thing, threatening to choke him. He should have been there when the accident happened. Should have answered his phone when Sarah called, instead of being caught up in his own problems at the shop. The kitchen grew darker as night settled in, but Jake didn't bother turning on the lights. He sat there, lost in thoughts of Sarah, of the war, of all the ways he was failing their daughter. Lily deserved better than a father who flinched at loud noises, who couldn't even properly celebrate her achievements because he was too trapped in his own head. Outside, crickets began their nightly chorus. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Jake stared out the window, watching as the last traces of daylight faded from the sky. The darkness seemed to mirror the heaviness in his chest, the constant weight of wondering if he would ever find his way back to the man he used to be, the man Sarah had loved, the father Lily deserved. The beer had grown warm in his hand, barely touched. In the quiet of the kitchen, surrounded by shadows, Jake Thompson sat alone with his thoughts, the question echoing in his mind, would he ever get better? The night offered no answers, only the steady tick of the clock and the weight of memories he couldn't escape. The morning sun beat down on the weathered sign of Thompson's Auto Repair. Jake moved through his morning routine with mechanical precision, checking his schedule and organizing his tools. The familiar scent of motor oil and metal hung in the air, a constant companion in his daily life. The sound of tires crunching on gravel caught his attention. Through the open garage door, he watched a navy blue sedan pull up, its engine making an unmistakable clicking sound that spoke of trouble with the timing belt. Jake straightened up, wiping his hands on the red shop rag tucked into his back pocket. A woman stepped out of the car, her brown hair falling just past her shoulders. She carried herself with quiet confidence, dressed in professional attire that seemed at odds with the gritty atmosphere of the repair shop. "Good morning," she said, offering a warm smile. "I'm hoping you can help me with this noise my car's been making." "Morning," Jake replied, his voice rough from disuse. "I'm Jake Thompson. Emma Caldwell," she said, extending her hand. Jake hesitated for a moment before shaking it briefly. "It started making this clicking sound yesterday." Jake nodded, already moving toward the car. "Mind starting it up for me?" Emma slid back into the driver's seat and turned the key. The clicking sound grew more pronounced, and Jake's suspicions were confirmed. He gestured for her to cut the engine. "Timing belt's going," he said, crossing his arms. "Not something you want to ignore." Emma stepped out of the car, her expression concerned but calm. "How long will it take to fix?" "Can probably get it done today if you'd like to leave it." Jake moved to his workbench, jotting down notes on a work order form. "You'll need a ride, though." "That's no problem. I can walk to my office. It's just a few blocks away at the medical center." Jake's hand paused momentarily over the paper. He'd heard about the medical center's new psychiatric wing, but he'd made a point of avoiding that part of town. "I could give you a call when it's ready," he offered, keeping his eyes on the form. "That would be perfect." Emma watched him work, her gaze thoughtful. "You know, I've heard quite a bit about you from some of the veterans in town." Jake's shoulders tensed slightly. He focused on writing down the details of the repair, trying to maintain his composure. "Small town," he muttered. "Indeed," Emma agreed softly. "They speak highly of your work. Many of them trust you with their vehicles." There was something in her tone, not pity, but understanding, that made Jake look up. Her eyes held a gentle wisdom that seemed to see right through his carefully constructed walls. "Just doing my job," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Emma nodded, accepting his response without pushing. She glanced around the shop, taking in the meticulously organized tools and the certificates on the wall. "Your father's shop, wasn't it?" "Yeah," Jake confirmed, surprised by her knowledge. "How'd you know?" "The sign outside still has both Thompson names," she explained. And again, small town. Jake found himself relaxing slightly, despite his usual guardedness. There was something about Dr. Caldwell that put him at ease, even as it made him wary. As he worked on her car throughout the day, Emma stopped by during her lunch break to check on the progress. She brought coffee, black, if I remember correctly from Mary at the diner, and asked questions about the repair process that showed genuine interest. When she returned in the late afternoon to pick up her car, Jake had just finished the final checks. The engine purred smoothly now, the clicking completely gone. "Good as new," he said, closing the hood. "Should last you a good long while now." Emma smiled, reaching for her purse. "Thank you, Jake. I really appreciate the quick work." She paused, then reached into her jacket pocket. "Before I forget." She pulled out a simple white business card and held it out to him. Jake stared at it, making no move to take it. "I run a program at the medical center," she explained quietly. "It's specifically for veterans dealing with PTSD. No charge for their services." Jake's jaw tightened. You don't need to decide anything right now," Emma interrupted gently. "Just take the card. If you ever want to talk about anything, my door is always open." Jake stood frozen for a moment, then slowly reached out and took the card. The paper felt heavy in his hands, weighted with implications he wasn't ready to face. Emma paid for the repair and thanked him again. As she got into her car, she turned back one last time. "The offer stands, Jake, whenever you're ready." He watched her drive away, the business card still in his hand. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shop floor, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt something shift inside him, a tiny crack in the walls he'd built so carefully around himself. He looked down at the card, Dr. Emma Caldwell's name printed in simple black letters. His first instinct was to throw it away, to reject the help she offered. But something stopped him. Maybe it was the genuine kindness in her eyes, or the way she'd spoken to him like a person rather than a problem to be fixed. Instead of tossing the card, Jake slipped it into his wallet, telling himself he was just being polite. But as he returned to his work, her words echoed in his mind. "Whenever you're ready." Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting warm patches across the worn wooden table where Jake and Lily sat having breakfast. Jake stirred his coffee absently, watching the dark liquid swirl. The business card Emma had given him yesterday felt like it was burning a hole in his wallet. Lily munched on her cereal, her spoon clinking against the bowl in the quiet kitchen. She glanced up at her father, noting the distant look in his eyes, one she knew all too well. "Dad?" she asked, breaking the silence. Jake looked up from his coffee. "Yeah, sweetheart?" "You know Sarah from my class?" Lily pushed her cereal around the bowl. "Her parents were having trouble last year. They were fighting a lot." Jake nodded, though his mind was still half elsewhere. "That right?" "Yeah." Lily took another bite of cereal. But then her mom and dad started going to this person who helps people talk about their feelings. Sarah says they're much better now. They even went to the school play together last month. Jake's hand tightened around his coffee mug. He knew what Lily was trying to do. She was smart, too smart sometimes. The weight of Emma's business card seemed to grow heavier in his back pocket. "That's good for them," he said quietly, not meeting Lily's hopeful gaze. Lily pressed on, her voice gentle but determined. "Sarah says her dad was scared to go at first. He didn't want to talk to anybody either." She paused, pushing her empty bowl away. "But he did it anyway, because he loved them." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Don't want to be late." Lily's face fell slightly, but she nodded and gathered her backpack. Jake watched her walk to the door, her shoulders slightly slumped. She turned back before leaving. "I love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart," Jake managed, his throat tight. He waited until she was gone before slumping back into his chair, running his hands through his hair. The morning passed in a blur at the shop. Jake threw himself into his work, trying to lose himself in the familiar rhythm of repairs. But his mind kept wandering back to Lily's words at breakfast, to Emma's kind eyes when she'd offered her help, to the business card that felt like it weighed a ton. By afternoon, the shop was quiet. Most of the day's customers had come and gone, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts and a stubborn transmission that needed work. The radio played softly in the background, country music mixing with the sound of his tools against metal. He reached for a wrench, and his hand trembled slightly. Jake stared at it, remembering how his hands used to be steady as a rock in combat. Now they shook sometimes, especially after his nightmares or when memories ambushed him in broad daylight. Wiping his hands on a shop rag, Jake walked over to where his jacket hung. He pulled out his wallet and found Emma's card, still crisp and white despite being carried around for a day. The simple black text seemed to stare back at him. Dr. Emma Caldwell, Psychiatric Services, followed by her phone number. Jake's throat felt dry as he studied the card. His fingers trembled more noticeably now, and he could feel his heart starting to race. Opening up to someone, talking about what happened overseas, about losing his wife, the thought made his chest tight with anxiety. But then Lily's words echoed in his mind. He did it anyway, because he loved them. Jake looked around his shop, at the tools lined up precisely as he learned in the military, at the photos of Lily on his desk, at the empty coffee cup from this morning. This was his life now. But maybe it could be more than just getting through each day. His hands still shaking slightly, Jake took out his wallet again. He stared at the card one more time, then carefully tucked it away. Tomorrow, he decided. Tomorrow, he would call. It wasn't a solution, Jake knew that. It wasn't even a promise that things would get better. But as he turned back to the transmission he'd been working on, he felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time, a tiny spark of hope. The afternoon sun slanted through the shop windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Jake picked up his wrench and got back to work, the weight of his decision settling over him like a familiar blanket. Tomorrow would bring what it would bring. For now, he had cars to fix and a daughter to pick up from school, one step at a time. He worked steadily, letting the familiar movements ground him. The radio played on, the tools clinked against metal, and outside, life in their small town continued as usual. But inside Jake's shop, something had shifted, small but significant, like the first turn of a key in a long rusted lock. The business card sat in his wallet, waiting for tomorrow. Jake's hands steadied as he worked, finding their rhythm in the familiar tasks before him. The trembling had stopped, at least for now. Sometimes, he thought, the hardest battles were the ones you fought with yourself. But maybe, just maybe, you didn't have to fight them alone. Jake's truck crawled into the parking lot of the small medical building where Dr. Emma Caldwell's office was located. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. The morning sun felt too bright, making him squint as he checked his watch. 9:57 a.m., 3 minutes early. He sat there, engine idling, watching other cars pass by on the street. His throat felt dry. The thought of walking into that office made his stomach twist into knots. Part of him wanted to turn the key, drive away, and forget this whole thing. "Get it together, Thompson," he muttered to himself, finally switching off the engine. The building's entrance felt miles away as he walked toward it. Each step seemed heavier than the last. Inside, the hallway was quiet, except for the soft hum of air conditioning. The walls were painted a calm beige, decorated with generic landscape paintings that Jake barely noticed as he searched for room 204. There it was. Dr. Emma Caldwell, licensed clinical psychologist. Jake's hand hovered over the doorknob for a moment before he forced himself to turn it. A small waiting room greeted him, furnished with comfortable-looking chairs and potted plants. The space smelled faintly of lavender. Before he could settle into one of the chairs, the inner office door opened. "Jake," Emma said warmly, stepping out to greet him. She wore a simple navy blazer over a white blouse, her brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. "I'm glad you came. Please, come in." Her office was cozy but professional. 2 armchairs faced each other near a window that let in natural light. Jake chose the chair furthest from the door, his body tense as he sat down. "Would you like some water?" Emma asked, gesturing to a small side table with a pitcher and glasses. Jake shook his head. "I'm fine." His voice came out rougher than he intended. Emma settled into the chair across from him, notepad in her lap. Her presence was calm, unhurried. "How are you feeling about being here today?" Jake's jaw clenched. He stared at a spot on the wall just past her shoulder, like I'd rather be anywhere else. A small smile touched Emma's lips. "That's completely normal." Many people feel that way during their first session. Silence stretched between them. Jake's leg bounced slightly, a nervous habit he couldn't control. "Why don't we start with your military experience?" Emma suggested gently. "Whatever you feel comfortable sharing." Jake's chest tightened. Images flashed through his mind. Sand, heat, explosions, his friends' faces. He pushed them away quickly, like closing a door. "Did 3 tours," he said flatly. "Army, Special Forces." Emma waited, but Jake didn't elaborate. His fingers drummed against the armrest. "What made you decide to join?" she pressed carefully. "Family tradition." Jake's answers came out clipped, defensive. "My old man served. His father before him." Emma nodded, making a brief note. "And when did you leave the service?" 4 years ago." Jake shifted in his chair, uncomfortable with the direction of the questions. His mind drifted to his last deployment, but he forced it back to the present. "That must have been a significant adjustment," Emma observed. Jake's laugh was short, bitter. "You could say that." Emma leaned forward slightly, her expression open and attentive. "How did you handle the transition to civilian life?" The question hit too close to home. Jake's shoulders tensed further. "Look, I'm not really good at this talking thing." "That's okay," Emma assured him. "We can take it slow. Maybe tell me about your work at the garage instead." Jake relaxed fractionally. Cars he could talk about. "It was my dad's shop. Left it to me when he passed. Been running it since I got back." "Do you enjoy the work?" "Yeah. Cars make sense. You find what's broken, you fix it. Unlike people," he thought, but didn't say. Emma seemed to hear the unspoken words anyway. Sometimes people aren't so different from cars. They just need someone to help them figure out what needs fixing. Jake met her eyes for the first time since sitting down. There was no judgment there, just quiet understanding. Something in his chest loosened slightly. The rest of the session continued with Emma asking simple questions about his daily life, steering clear of the heavier topics after sensing his resistance. Jake's answers remained brief, but the crushing tension in his shoulders gradually eased. When Emma glanced at the clock, Jake was surprised to see an hour had passed. "I think that's enough for today," she said. "Would you like to schedule another session for next week?" Jake hesitated, running a hand through his short hair. Part of him wanted to say no, to walk out and never come back. But another part, a quieter part, remembered the way Emma had let him set the pace, hadn't pushed when he pulled back. "Same time?" he asked finally. Emma smiled, warm and genuine. "Same time works perfectly. I'll see you next week, Jake." He nodded, standing quickly. The office suddenly felt too small, too intimate. He needed air. "Thanks," he managed, before heading for the door. Outside, the morning had grown warmer. Jake walked to his truck, his emotions a confusing mix of exhaustion and something else, maybe relief. He climbed into the driver's seat but didn't start the engine right away. His hands shook slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. Talking about even the surface-level stuff had been harder than he'd expected, but as he sat there, the weight on his chest felt just a little lighter than before. The morning sun filtered through Jake's mechanic shop windows as he worked on a transmission. His movements were practiced, but his mind wandered to therapy sessions with Emma. Each conversation felt like walking through a minefield. The familiar smell of oil and metal usually brought comfort, but lately reminded him of burning vehicles overseas, the metallic taste of fear. The door chimed, making him flinch. "Mrs. Henderson dropped off her Buick." "Morning, Jake," she called cheerfully. "Morning," he replied roughly, ducking under the hood. That afternoon, Jake sat in Emma's office. The leather chair creaked as he shifted uncomfortably. "How have you been sleeping?" Emma asked. "Fine." Jake lied, knowing he'd been pacing nights, watching Lily sleep. "We both know that's not true." He ran his hands through his hair. "What do you want me to say? That I wake up in cold sweats? Hear things that aren't there? If that's what's happening, yes." This is a safe space. Images flashed through his mind. Sarah's laugh, dancing with Lily. The phone call that changed everything. "I keep seeing her," he whispered. "Sarah. Not just in dreams." Emma leaned forward. "Tell me about that." "Yesterday, I thought I saw her in the grocery store. Same yellow dress she wore the day of the accident. The silence felt heavy. It's not just the war anymore, Jake said painfully. Sometimes I can't tell what's worse, overseas memories or losing her. Trauma compounds, Emma explained softly. Jake stood abruptly, pacing. I should have been there. If I hadn't been deployed when she had that accident. You couldn't have prevented what happened. I could have been there for Lily. Instead, I was halfway around the world when my daughter lost her mother. His shoulders slumped. Now I can barely look at her without seeing Sarah. Later sessions followed similar patterns. Resistance, gentle pushing, painful truths. Each revelation felt like betraying his training to stay strong. One session focused on Lily. Jake described struggling with his daughter's endless energy and questions. She deserves better, he admitted shamefully. A father who can actually be there. You are there, working on yourself. That matters. But guilt surrounded him like a wall. That evening, Jake pulled into his driveway, drained. The porch light glowed through gathering dusk. The screen door burst open. Lily bounded out, clutching paper. Daddy, look what I made. Her eyes sparkled as she thrust the drawing toward him. Jake tried focusing, but colors swam. His head was full of therapy conversations, stirred memories. He felt familiar chest tightness, scattering thoughts. That's nice, sweetheart, he managed, forcing a smile. Lily's face fell, sensing his distance. That's you, and me, and... She trailed off, finger hovering over yellow crayon hair. Jake's throat constricted. Thank you, it's beautiful. Go start homework. Lily nodded, enthusiasm dimmed, disappearing inside. Jake sank into a kitchen chair. The drawing showed 3 stick figures against blue sky, flowers surrounding their house. The yellow-haired figure smiled like Sarah used to. Shame washed over him. His daughter had reached out, and he couldn't give her attention. The weight of failing as a father pressed down, making breathing difficult. The kitchen clock ticked loudly as Jake stared at the crayon family, reminded of everything lost and everything he was failing to be. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through Emma's office windows as Jake settled into the familiar leather chair. His hands fidgeted with the worn baseball cap he always carried, a nervous habit he developed over the years. The room felt different today, somehow smaller and more intimate than during their previous sessions. Emma sat across from him, her notepad balanced on her knee. She wore a simple navy sweater, and her kind eyes watched him with patient understanding. The silence between them stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable anymore. How are you feeling today, Jake? Emma's voice was gentle, carrying none of the clinical detachment he'd expected from therapists. Jake took a deep breath, his chest tight with the weight of words he'd never spoken aloud. I've been thinking a lot about Sarah, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The name of his late wife felt foreign on his tongue after years of avoiding it. Emma leaned forward slightly, her presence encouraging but not intrusive. Would you like to tell me about her? Jake's fingers tightened around the cap. She was everything to me. He swallowed hard, fighting against the familiar burn in his throat. The accident happened on a Tuesday, just a regular Tuesday. The memory washed over him like a cold wave. She was picking up groceries. I was supposed to do it, but I was too caught up fixing Mrs. Henderson's transmission. His voice cracked. If I had done what I was supposed to do. Jake. Emma's voice was soft but firm. You couldn't have known what would happen that day. But I should have been there. The words burst from him with unexpected force. I was always there before, during deployments, watching out for my unit. But the one time it really mattered, the one person who needed me most. He dropped his head, unable to continue. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken grief. When Jake finally looked up, he saw something in Emma's eyes he hadn't noticed before. Not just understanding, but recognition. Sometimes, Emma began, her voice carrying a different quality now. Life takes from us in ways we can never prepare for. She paused, seeming to weigh her next words carefully. I understand the guilt you're carrying, Jake. I carry my own. Jake's attention sharpened, sensing a shift in their dynamic. My husband was a soldier, Emma continued, her professional demeanor softening slightly. He died in combat 5 years ago. The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. He studied her face, seeing for the first time the shadow of loss that mirrored his own. I didn't know. It's not something I usually share with patients, Emma acknowledged. But I want you to understand that when I say I know what you're going through, I truly do. Jake sat back, processing this new information. The woman who had been helping him navigate his own darkness had walked through similar shadows. How do you, he struggled to find the right words, how do you keep going? Emma's smile was gentle, but tinged with sadness. One day at a time. And by remembering that helping others heal helps me heal too. She straightened in her chair. The guilt you feel about Sarah, it's natural, but it's not what she would want for you. Jake felt tears threatening to spill. I see her in Lily's eyes sometimes, he admitted, and it kills me that I can't be the father she deserves because I'm so broken. You're not broken, Jake. Emma's voice was firm. You're wounded. There's a difference. Wounds can heal, even if they leave scars. For the first time since starting therapy, Jake felt something shift inside him. The wall he'd built around his grief developed a small crack. I miss her so much, he whispered, letting the tears fall freely now. And I'm so tired of pretending I'm okay. Then stop pretending, Emma suggested softly. Let yourself feel it. Let yourself grieve. Jake wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, feeling both drained and somehow lighter. Is that what you did? Emma nodded slowly. Eventually, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it was also the most necessary. The rest of the session passed in a blur of honest conversation and shared understanding. When it was time to leave, Jake stood up feeling different, raw and vulnerable, but also strangely hopeful. Emma walked him to the door, as she always did. Same time next week? Jake nodded, then paused. Thank you for telling me about your husband. I know that couldn't have been easy. Sometimes the hardest things to share are the ones that matter most, Emma replied. Outside, Jake stood in the cool evening air, taking deep breaths. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. For the first time in years, he felt a connection with someone who truly understood his pain. The weight on his chest, while still there, felt a little more bearable. He looked up at the darkening sky, thinking about Sarah, about Emma's husband, about all the losses that shape who we become. The wind rustled through nearby trees, and Jake felt an unexpected sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't alone in his struggle anymore, and somehow that made all the difference. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window as Jake stood at the counter making breakfast. The gentle sizzle of eggs in the pan filled the quiet space. Lily sat at the table, her math homework spread out before her, pencil tapping against her chin as she worked through a problem. Jake glanced at his daughter, his heart swelling with a mix of love and lingering guilt. The past few days had felt different somehow, lighter, since his breakthrough with Emma. The weight on his shoulders wasn't gone, but it had shifted, becoming more manageable. Hey, kiddo, Jake said, sliding a plate of scrambled eggs in front of Lily. I need to tell you something. Lily looked up from her homework, her bright eyes curious. What is it, Dad? Jake sat down across from her, his own plate untouched, his hands wrapped around his coffee mug, drawing comfort from its warmth. I've been seeing someone, a doctor, to help me with some stuff in my head. Like a therapy doctor? Lily asked, putting down her pencil. Yeah, Jake nodded, surprised by her matter-of-fact tone. Dr. Caldwell. She helps people like me, veterans, who sometimes have trouble dealing with things from the past. Lily took a bite of her eggs, considering this. Like when you get really quiet sometimes, or when loud noises make you jump? Jake's throat tightened at her perceptiveness. Yeah, exactly like that. I'm trying to get better at handling those things. That's good, Dad, Lily said with a small smile. Mrs. Peterson says getting help is brave. Tommy's mom goes to therapy too, and she seems happier now. Jake reached across the table and squeezed her hand, amazed by her simple acceptance. Thanks for understanding, sweetie. At the shop that day, Jake noticed small differences in how he approached his work. When Mr. Henderson came in complaining about his transmission for the third time that week, Jake didn't feel the usual surge of irritation. Instead, he found himself explaining the problem patiently, walking the elderly man through the repairs needed. During his lunch break, Jake sat in his office, looking at the family photo on his desk. It was taken shortly after Lily was born, Sarah holding their newborn daughter, while Jake stood behind them, beaming with pride. The familiar ache in his chest was still there, but it felt different now, less like a crushing weight and more like an old injury that was finally starting to heal. By mid-afternoon, Jake was under the hood of a Ford pickup when he heard the shop door open. "Be with you in a minute," he called out, finishing up the adjustment he was making. "No rush," came the response, and Jake recognized Mrs. Martinez's voice. She was a regular customer, always bringing her ancient Volkswagen in for repairs. Usually, her constant chatter about her grandchildren set Jake's nerves on edge, but today he found himself listening with genuine interest as she showed him pictures on her phone. Later that week, during his session with Emma, Jake sat in his usual chair, but his posture was different, less rigid, more open. Emma noticed the change immediately. "You seem more relaxed today, Jake," she observed, her voice warm and encouraging. Jake nodded slowly. "I told Lily about coming here," he said, "about getting help." Emma's eyes lit up with interest. "How did that conversation go?" "Better than I expected," Jake admitted. "She just accepted it, like it was the most normal thing in the world." "Children often have a way of simplifying things we adults make complicated," Emma said with a gentle smile. "How has it been since our last session?" Jake shifted in his chair, gathering his thoughts. "It's different. Not perfect, but different. Work feels easier. I'm not as quick to get frustrated. But—" He paused, struggling to find the right words. "But?" Emma prompted softly. "But sometimes I feel guilty about feeling better," Jake confessed. "Like I'm betraying Sarah's memory by not carrying all that pain anymore." Emma leaned forward slightly. "Jake, healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean loving any less. It means learning to carry your memories in a way that doesn't break you." Jake absorbed her words, feeling their truth, but still wrestling with doubt. "I know that. In my head, I know that. But sometimes your heart needs more time to catch up," Emma finished for him. "That's perfectly normal. Healing isn't linear, Jake. There will be good days and hard days. What matters is that you're moving forward, even if it's just small steps." Jake nodded, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, small steps," he echoed. The phrase felt right, fitting for the subtle changes he'd noticed in himself lately. As their session drew to a close, Emma stood up. "You're doing good work here, Jake. It's okay to acknowledge that, to feel proud of your progress." Jake got up from his chair, feeling both encouraged and uncertain. The familiar mix of emotions swirled in his chest. Hope mingled with fear, progress shadowed by doubt. "Remember," Emma said as he reached for the door handle, "healing isn't about erasing the past. It's about learning to live with it in a way that lets you move forward." Jake stepped out into the afternoon sunshine, Emma's words echoing in his mind as he walked to his truck. The key felt solid in his hand as he started the engine, and as he pulled out of the parking lot, he thought about all the small victories of the past few days, telling Lily about therapy, being more patient at work, allowing himself moments of peace without immediate guilt. The road stretched ahead of him as he drove home, and for the first time in a long while, Jake felt like he might actually be heading somewhere better, even if he couldn't quite see the destination yet. The autumn fair buzzed with life in Willow Creek's town square. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the scent of cotton candy and caramel apples wafted through the air. Jake walked beside Lily, his hands stuffed in his jacket pockets, trying to focus on his daughter's excitement rather than the press of people around them. "Can we try the ring toss, Dad?" Lily tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a booth decorated with stuffed animals. Her eyes sparkled with hope, reminding Jake so much of her mother that it made his chest ache. "Sure, sweetheart." Jake managed a small smile, following her through the crowd. The fair had been Lily's idea. She'd brought home a flyer from school and wouldn't stop talking about it. Despite his reservations about crowded places, Jake couldn't bring himself to disappoint her. Lily tossed rings at bottles while Jake stood back watching. He'd been doing better lately, thanks to his sessions with Emma. The techniques she'd taught him for staying grounded were helping. Deep breaths. Focus on the present. Notice 5 things you can see. A stuffed penguin, Lily's purple sweater, the wooden booth, cotton candy machine, the setting sun. "I did it!" Lily's voice pulled him from his mental exercise. She held up a small teddy bear, beaming with pride. "Look, Dad. That's great, kiddo." Jake felt himself relaxing slightly. Maybe this wasn't so bad after all. They wandered through the fair, stopping at different booths. Jake even found himself enjoying some moments, watching Lily's face light up at each new discovery. The knot in his stomach began to loosen. Then it happened. A truck backfired nearby, the sound like a gunshot cracking through the evening air. Jake's world tilted sideways. The fair disappeared, replaced by dust and sand and the echo of gunfire. His heart hammered against his ribs, and sweat broke out on his forehead. "Not here. Not now. Dad?" Lily's voice seemed to come from far away. "Are you okay?" Another bang, someone dropping a metal trash can, and Jake flinched violently. His breathing came in short, sharp gasps. The crowd pressed in around him, too close, too loud. He could smell gunpowder and blood, could hear the shouts of his fellow soldiers. "Dad, please." Lily touched his arm, and Jake jerked away instinctively. "Don't." The word came out as a harsh bark. He saw Lily step back, hurt and confusion written across her face, but he couldn't stop himself. Just stay back." People were staring now. Jake could feel their eyes on him, judging, pitying. The world spun faster. Memories and reality blending together in a nauseating spiral. He had to get out. Had to escape. "I'm sorry," he muttered, already backing away. "I can't. I have to." "Dad, wait." Lily called after him, but Jake was already moving, pushing through the crowd, desperate to get away from the noise, the people, the memories. He stumbled through the fairground, barely aware of where he was going. His daughter's hurt expression burned in his mind, mixing with fragments of combat memories. The sound of his boots on the pavement became the thunder of explosions. Every shadow held potential threats. Somehow, he made it to his shop. The familiar smell of oil and metal helped anchor him slightly, but the shame and guilt were overwhelming. He'd failed her. Again. After all the progress he'd made in therapy, after all Emma's help, he'd fallen apart in front of everyone. In front of his daughter. Jake's hands shook as he fumbled with his keys, finally managing to unlock the door. The shop was dark and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos of the fair. He didn't bother with the lights, preferring the shadows that matched his mood. Sinking onto the old chair behind his desk, Jake buried his face in his hands. Emma's business card sat on the desk, where he'd left it earlier that day. He should call her. She'd told him to reach out if he ever had an episode, had made him promise not to isolate himself. Jake picked up his phone, staring at the screen. Emma's number was right there, just a few taps away. She would understand. She would know what to say, how to help him process what had happened. But shame kept his fingers frozen. How could he face her after this? He'd been doing so well, making real progress. Now it felt like he was back at square one, as broken and lost as ever. The phone felt heavy in his hand as he set it back down without making the call. In the darkness of his shop, surrounded by the ghosts of his failures, Jake sat alone, the weight of his setback crushing down on him. The tools and cars he usually found comfort in now seemed to mock him, reminders of a normal life he couldn't seem to hold on to. His daughter's scared face flashed through his mind again. He'd promised himself he wouldn't let his trauma affect her, wouldn't let her see him like that. Now he'd broken that promise in the worst possible way, pushing her away when she only wanted to help. Jake reached for the phone again, then pulled his hand back. Emma's card seemed to stare at him, accusingly, from the desk. He remained frozen in his chair, caught between the need for help and the paralysis of shame, unsure how to bridge the gap between where he was and where he needed to be. Jake sat in his truck outside Emma's office, his fingers drumming nervously on the steering wheel. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot, and a cool breeze rustled through the trees. He'd spent the past 3 days holed up in his shop, barely speaking to anyone, even Lily. His phone felt heavy in his hand as he dialed Emma's number. Each ring made his heart beat faster, and he almost hung up twice before her warm voice answered. Dr. Caldwell speaking. Emma? Jake's voice came out rougher than he intended. It's Jake Thompson. There was a brief pause, and he could hear papers shuffling in the background. Jake? I'm glad you called. He let out a shaky breath. Not great. I messed up at the fair. Had an episode. Scared Lily. The words tumbled out, each one carrying the weight of his shame. Would you like to come in and talk about it? Emma's voice remained steady, non-judgmental. I have an opening this morning if you'd like. Jake glanced at his watch. The shop wouldn't open for another hour. Yeah, I think I need to. 20 minutes later, Jake found himself sitting in the familiar leather chair in Emma's office. Sunlight streamed through the window, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Emma sat across from him, her notepad on her lap, her expression open and attentive. I feel like I'm back at square one, Jake admitted, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. All that progress, gone in an instant. Emma leaned forward slightly. Progress isn't linear, Jake. What happened at the fair doesn't erase the steps you've taken forward. But I pushed Lily away, his voice cracked. She was just trying to help, and I. Tell me what happened, Emma encouraged gently. Jake described the scene at the fair. The fess, sudden explosion of fireworks, the rush of panic, the way his world had narrowed to a pinpoint of fear. 1 minute I was watching Lily play games. The next I was back there, in the middle of. He swallowed hard, and when Lily touched my arm, I couldn't. That's a natural response to being triggered, Emma explained. Your brain went into survival mode. It doesn't mean you've failed. Jake ran a hand over his face. It feels like failure. Every time I think I'm getting better, something happens, and I'm right back where I started. Recovery isn't about never having setbacks, Emma said, her voice gentle but firm. It's about learning how to handle them when they come. You're here now, talking about it. That's progress. Later that week, Jake returned for another session. The office felt different somehow, less intimidating. Emma's presence had become a source of comfort rather than anxiety. I've been thinking about Lily, Jake began, settling into the chair. About how much she's had to adapt to my problems. Emma nodded encouragingly. What specifically concerns you about your relationship with her? She shouldn't have to be the strong one, Jake said, his voice thick with emotion. She's just a kid, but sometimes she acts more like the parent than I do. After the fair, she left soup outside my door. Didn't even knock, just left it there because she knew I needed space. He shook his head. That's not right. It sounds like Lily has developed her own ways of showing love and support, Emma observed. But you're right, it's a lot for a child to carry. Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I don't know how to be the father she needs. Every time I try to step up, something triggers me, and I'm back to hiding in my shop. Being a good father doesn't mean being perfect, Emma said softly. It means showing up, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. But what if I keep failing? What if I can't get better? Emma said her, notepad aside. Jake, look at me. She waited until he met her eyes. You're already getting better. You're here, talking about your fears, instead of burying them. You're acknowledging the impact your PTSD has on Lily, instead of pretending everything's fine. That's not failure, that's courage. Jake felt something loosen in his chest. I just want to be there for her, really there. not just physically present. And that desire, that commitment to trying, that's what matters, Emma assured him. Healing isn't about reaching some perfect state where nothing ever triggers you. It's about learning to manage those triggers, about being honest with yourself and your loved ones when you're struggling. They spent the rest of the session discussing practical strategies for communicating with Lily, ways to explain his PTSD in terms she could understand, and techniques for grounding himself when triggers arose. As Jake stood to leave, he felt both exposed and lightened, as if sharing his deepest fears had somehow made them less overwhelming. Emma's words about progress versus perfection echoed in his mind, offering a new perspective on his journey toward healing. "Same time next week?" Emma asked, standing to walk him to the door. Jake nodded, managing a small but genuine smile. "Yeah, same time next week." Jake pulled up to Willow Creek Park early Saturday morning, the autumn air crisp and clean. Beside him, Lily bounced in her seat, her eyes bright with excitement. It had been months since they'd visited the park together, and Jake felt a mixture of guilt and hope stirring in his chest. "Can we go to the swings first, Dad?" Lily asked, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "Sure thing, sweetheart." Jake's voice was steady, calmer than it had been in weeks. The sessions with Emma were helping, teaching him to stay grounded in the present moment. They walked together across the dewy grass, their footsteps leaving temporary marks in the morning frost. The playground was quiet, at this early hour, just the way Jake preferred it. Fewer people meant fewer unexpected noises, fewer chances for his anxiety to spike. Lily ran ahead to the swings, her purple jacket fluttering behind her like wings. Jake watched her, really watched her, the way Emma had been teaching him to do. He noticed how her hair caught the sunlight, how her laugh echoed across the empty playground. "Push me, Dad," she called out, already settling into one of the swings. Jake positioned himself behind her, his hands gentle on her back. Each push was careful, measured. He focused on the rhythm. Push, step back, push, step back. The repetitive motion was almost therapeutic. "Higher," Lily giggled, and Jake found himself smiling too. "Remember when you were little?" he asked, surprising himself by initiating the conversation. "You used to be scared of the big swings." "Really?" Lily turned her head slightly, trying to catch his eye. "Yeah, you'd only use the baby swings. Your mom." He paused, the words catching in his throat. But this time the memory didn't feel like a knife to the heart. "Your mom would sing to you while she pushed you. Some silly song about flying." Lily's swing slowed slightly. "I think I remember that. Was it the one about the little bird?" Jake nodded, continuing to push. "That's the one. She had such a beautiful voice." They fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by Lily's occasional laughs of delight. After a while, she jumped off the swing, landing with the fearless grace of childhood. "Can we get hot chocolate?" she asked, pointing to a small coffee cart that had just opened at the edge of the park. Jake checked his watch. In the past, he might have made an excuse to leave, to retreat to the safety of his routine. But today felt different. "Sure, why not?" They walked to the cart together, Lily's small hand slipping into his. The vendor was a friendly elderly man who gave Lily extra marshmallows in her hot chocolate. Jake ordered a black coffee for himself, and they found a nearby bench to sit on. "Dad?" Lily blew on her drink, creating ripples in the chocolate. "Are you feeling better these days?" The question caught Jake off guard, but he didn't flinch from it. Emma had been helping him learn how to have these conversations. "I'm trying to," he said honestly. "Some days are harder than others." Lily nodded, seeming older than her years. "I can tell you're trying. You smile more now." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'm sorry, I haven't been. I haven't been the dad you deserve." "You're my dad," Lily said simply, as if that explained everything. "I just want you to be okay." They spent the next hour exploring the park, something they hadn't done since before his last major episode. Lily showed him her favorite climbing tree, and Jake found himself sharing stories about his own childhood adventures. When she asked about his time in the military, he managed to tell her some of the good memories, about the friends he'd made, the places he'd seen. As the morning wore on, other families began arriving at the park. Usually, this would be Jake's cue to leave, but today he felt steady enough to stay. He watched Lily make friends with another girl her age, their laughter carrying across the playground. When it was finally time to head home, Jake felt tired, but content. It wasn't perfect. He'd still tensed up at a car backfiring in the distance, still had moments where the memories threatened to overwhelm him, but he'd stayed present. He'd stayed with his daughter. That evening, they sat together on the front porch of their small house. The sky had cleared after a brief afternoon shower, revealing a canvas of stars above them. Lily leaned against his side, wrapped in her favorite blanket. "Look, Dad," she pointed upward. "Remember when you taught me about the Big Dipper?" "I do," Jake said softly, following her finger to the familiar constellation. "Your mom knew all the star stories she used to tell them to you when you were little." This time, mentioning her didn't feel like reopening a wound. Instead, it felt like sharing something precious, keeping her memory alive in a way that could heal rather than hurt. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars twinkle above them. Jake realized that his hands weren't shaking, his chest wasn't tight with anxiety. He was just there, present in the moment with his daughter, feeling the cool night air and the warmth of her presence beside him. The PTSD was still there. He could feel it lurking at the edges of his consciousness, but it no longer felt like it defined him. Emma's words came back to him. Healing isn't about erasing the past, it's about learning to carry it differently. Lily's breathing had grown steady against his side, and he realized she was starting to doze off. Looking down at her peaceful face, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time. Hope. Not the desperate kind that came from wishing things were different, but the quiet, steady kind that came from knowing that change was possible, one small step at a time. The stars continued their silent dance overhead, and for the first time in years, Jake allowed himself to simply be still, to exist in this moment with his daughter, to believe that maybe, just maybe, there could be more moments like this in their future. Jake pulled into the parking lot of Emma's office, his truck's engine rumbling to a stop. The familiar brick building looked different today, somehow smaller, more vulnerable. He'd gotten a text from Emma asking if he could come in early, and something in her message felt off. The waiting room was empty when he walked in. Emma opened her office door, and Jake immediately noticed the dark circles under her eyes. Her usual warm smile seemed strained. "Thanks for coming in early, Jake," she said, gesturing for him to take his usual seat. Instead of sitting behind her desk as she normally did, she took the chair next to him. "Everything okay?" Jake asked, his hands clasped together. After months of therapy, he'd gotten better at reading people's emotions, especially Emma's. She took a deep breath. "I received some news yesterday that I need to share with you." She paused, collecting her thoughts. "The funding for our veterans' PTSD program is being cut. The hospital board decided it's not financially viable anymore." Jake felt like someone had punched him in the gut. "What? They can't do that. This program helps so many people." His mind raced to the other veterans he'd met in the waiting room, each carrying their own battles. "Unfortunately, they can," Emma said, her voice tight. "And they are. We have about 2 months before the funding stops completely." Jake stood up and paced the small office. This program had become his lifeline. He thought about how far he'd come since that first session, how he could now sit through dinner with Lily without jumping at every sudden noise, how he could finally talk about Sarah without feeling like his chest would cave in. "There has to be something we can do," he said, turning to face Emma. "What about private donations?" Emma's shoulders slumped slightly. "I've been trying, but running a program like this isn't cheap. We need proper facilities, resources, and most importantly, qualified staff who understand trauma." Jake stopped pacing. "Let me help," he said firmly. "I know I'm just a mechanic, but I've got connections in town. My shop's been here for years. People trust me." Emma looked up at him, surprise crossing her face. "Jake, you don't have to." "Yes, I do," he interrupted. You've helped me more than you know. And not just me. All of us. We can't let this program die. Emma's eyes welled up with tears, and she quickly wiped them away. I'm sorry, she said, laughing softly. I've been holding this in since yesterday. I didn't know how to tell everyone. Jake sat back down, closer this time. How are you holding up? Really? She shook her head. Honestly, I'm terrified. This program, it's not just about helping veterans. It's my way of honoring David's memory. Her voice caught on her late husband's name. And now I might lose that too. Jake felt a familiar ache in his chest. Not for his own loss this time, but for hers. We'll figure something out, he said firmly. Maybe we could organize a fundraiser? Get the community involved? Emma's eyes lit up slightly. That's not a bad idea. The town has always been supportive of veteran causes. They spent the next hour brainstorming ideas. Jake suggested reaching out to local businesses for sponsorship, while Emma thought about organizing a benefit dinner. As they talked, Jake couldn't help but notice how their usual roles had shifted. For once, he wasn't the one needing support. He was offering it. I could talk to some of the other vets in the program, Jake offered. Maybe get them to share their stories. People need to understand what this program means to us. Emma nodded, making notes on a legal pad. That would be powerful. But Jake, she looked up at him, concern in her eyes. Are you sure you want to take this on? You've made so much progress, but something like this could be stressful. Jake understood her worry. A few months ago, he wouldn't have been able to handle this kind of pressure. But things were different now. I'm sure, he said. Besides, I won't be doing it alone. Their eyes met, and something shifted in the air between them. Emma smiled. A real smile this time, not the strained one from earlier. No, she said softly. You won't be alone. They spent the next few minutes outlining a preliminary plan. Jake would start reaching out to local businesses tomorrow, and Emma would work on getting permits for a community event. As their impromptu meeting wound down, Jake stood to leave. We're going to save this program, he said, his voice firm with conviction. Emma stood too, looking more hopeful than she had when he'd arrived. Thank you, Jake. I don't know what I would have done if... Hey, Jake interrupted gently. You don't have to thank me. You've done so much for all of us. It's time we return the favor. Standing there in the quiet office, Jake realized something had changed between them. The formal doctor-patient relationship had evolved into something else, and a partnership, a friendship, maybe even. He pushed that thought aside. Right now, they had work to do. They had a program to save. The community center buzzed with activity as Jake helped set up tables for the fundraiser. Streamers in soft blues and greens hung from the ceiling, and handmade posters lined the walls. Each one told a different veteran story. Not the war stories, but the stories of coming home, of healing, of finding hope again. These look great, Emma said, walking up beside him with a stack of programs. Her eyes sparkled with excitement, though Jake could still see the worry lines around them. Lily's artwork really brings them to life. Jake nodded, pride warming his chest. His daughter had spent hours drawing illustrations for the posters, adding splashes of color to the veterans' stories. She hasn't stopped talking about it for days. People from town started filtering in, familiar faces from the auto shop, parents from Lily's school, veterans Jake recognized from group therapy. Each person carried something: homemade dishes for the potluck, items for the silent auction, or envelopes with donations. Mrs. Henderson, who owned the local diner, wheeled in a cart loaded with her famous apple pies. "These'll fetch a good price at the auction," she said with a wink. "Nobody leaves my pies on the table." The local hardware store owner, Bill Matthews, arrived with a brand new tool set for the auction. "Figured some handy veteran might put these to good use," he said, setting them on the display table. Jake's throat tightened as he watched more people arrive. He'd lived in this town for years, but had always kept to himself, convinced that nobody could understand what he was going through. Now, seeing everyone come together like this, he felt something shift inside him. Lily darted between the tables, arranging flowers in mason jars. "Dad," she called out, "come see what Mr. Peterson brought." The old farmer had donated several gift baskets of fresh produce and homemade preserves. "My wife's special recipe," he said, pointing to the strawberry jam. "Been in her family for generations." Emma took the stage as the evening began, her voice clear and steady as she addressed the crowd. "Thank you all for being here tonight. This program isn't just about therapy. It's about community. It's about showing our veterans that they're not alone, that we stand with them as they heal." Jake watched her from the side of the stage, struck by her passion and strength. She'd built this program from nothing, driven by her own loss and desire to help others. Now, seeing the community rally around her cause, he understood why she'd never given up. The silent auction tables filled with bids. Children played games in the corner while their parents chatted and shared food. Veterans who usually kept to themselves were opening up, sharing stories over coffee and Mrs. Henderson's pie. "This is amazing," Emma said softly, joining Jake by the window. "I never expected such a turnout." "People care," Jake replied. "Maybe we just needed to give them a chance to show it." A young veteran Jake recognized from group therapy approached them, his wife and young son in tow. "Dr. Caldwell, I just wanted to say, this program, it saved my life, my family's life." His wife squeezed his hand, tears in her eyes. Throughout the evening, more stories emerged. Veterans spoke of dark times and healing moments. Families shared their journeys. The walls Jake had built around himself continued to crumble as he realized how many others understood his struggles. Lily appeared at his side, tugging his sleeve. "Dad, come see. We've raised so much money already." The donation board showed numbers far beyond what they'd hoped for. Local businesses had stepped up with matching donations, and individual contributions kept coming in. As the event wound down, Jake found himself standing next to Emma at the entrance, watching people leave with leftover food and auction items. The warmth of community still filled the air, along with the promise of something new beginning. "We did it," Emma said, her smile reaching her eyes for the first time in weeks. Jake looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not just his therapist, but a partner who had helped him find his way back to life. Together, they'd created something meaningful, something that would help others find their path to healing. The last rays of sunset filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow over the community center. All around them, volunteers were cleaning up, chatting, and laughing. Lily was helping Mrs. Henderson pack up her pie containers, her face glowing with accomplishment. Jake felt it then, a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd experienced since leaving the military. This wasn't just about saving a program anymore. It was about building connections, about showing others that healing was possible, about being part of something bigger than himself. Standing there with Emma, surrounded by the evidence of what they'd accomplished together, Jake knew this was just the beginning of their partnership. The road ahead still held challenges, but they would face them together, supported by a community that cared more than he'd ever realized. Jake sat in his usual chair in Emma's office, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. The room felt different now, less intimidating, more like a safe harbor. He'd been coming here for weeks, and each session brought him closer to understanding himself. "How are things with Lily?" Emma asked, her voice gentle. Jake's lips curved into a small smile. "Better. Last night, we made dinner together. Actually cooked, not just heated something up." He paused, remembering how Lily had stood on her tiptoes to reach the counter, determined to help cut the vegetables. "She told me about her science project. The whole time, I was present, really there with her." Emma nodded encouragingly. "That's significant progress, Jake. How did it feel like?" Jake searched for the words. "Like I was finally being the father she deserves." We laughed when I burned the garlic bread. Before, something like that would have sent me spiraling, thinking about all my failures. But this time, we just opened the windows and made jokes about it. The session continued, and Jake found himself opening up about memories he'd kept locked away. He talked about teaching Lily to ride a bike when she was younger, how his hands had shaken as he held the seat, terrified she'd fall. But she hadn't fallen. She'd pedaled away, laughing with pure joy. "I missed so many moments like that," Jake admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "Being trapped in my own head, I missed seeing her grow up. But you're here now," Emma reminded him. "That's what matters to Lily." After the session, Jake drove to the elementary school to pick up Lily. He watched her bounce down the steps, her backpack almost as big as she was. She climbed into the car, immediately launching into a story about her day. And then, in art class, Mrs. Peterson let us use watercolors. Lily's eyes lit up as she described her painting. "I made one for you, Dad. It's of our house, but I made the sky purple because why not?" Jake chuckled, feeling warmth spread through his chest. Purple sky, huh? That's creative thinking. At home, they settled into their new routine. Jake helped Lily with her homework, actually paying attention instead of just going through the motions. When she struggled with a math problem, he sat patiently with her, working it out step by step. "Remember what we talked about?" he said gently. "Sometimes the hardest problems just need to be broken down into smaller pieces." Lily looked up at him, her eyes wise beyond her years. "Like how you're getting better? Little by little?" Jake's breath caught in his throat. He reached out and squeezed her hand. "Yeah, sweetheart. Exactly like that." Later that evening, Jake found himself looking at old photos, something he'd avoided for years. Each image of his late wife used to feel like a knife to his heart. But now, sitting with Lily on the couch, the pain was different. Still there, but softer somehow. "Mom was really pretty," Lily said, pointing to a photo of their wedding day. "She was beautiful," Jake agreed, his voice steady. "Inside and out. Just like you." They continued flipping through the album, sharing memories and stories. Jake found himself telling Lily things he'd never shared before. Funny stories about when he and her mother first met, about their first apartment together, about the day they brought Lily home from the hospital. The next day's therapy session was particularly intense. Jake talked about the accident that took his wife's life, about the guilt he'd carried for not being there, about how he'd shut down emotionally afterward. "I couldn't save her," he said, his voice breaking. "Just like I couldn't save my buddies in combat. I felt like everything I touched turned to ash." Emma leaned forward. "But that's not true, Jake. Look at Lily. Look at how she's thriving now that you're allowing yourself to be present with her. You haven't destroyed anything. You're building something new." That evening, Jake sat at the kitchen table, watching Lily do her homework. She was humming softly to herself, concentration written across her face as she worked on her math problems. The setting sun painted the kitchen in warm golden light, and for the first time in years, Jake felt truly at peace. "Dad?" Lily looked up from her work. "Can we plant a garden in the spring?" Mrs. Peterson says growing things is good for the soul. Jake smiled, really smiled, feeling the warmth of hope in his chest. "Yeah, sweetheart, I think that's a wonderful idea. What should we plant?" As Lily launched into an excited description of all the flowers and vegetables she wanted to grow, Jake felt something shift inside him. The weight of grief and trauma was still there, but it no longer defined him. He was learning to carry it differently, to make room for joy alongside the pain. "And we can plant Mom's favorite flowers too," Lily added softly. "The purple ones." Jake reached across the table and took her hand. "That's perfect, Lily. We'll make it beautiful, together." Jake sat in his usual chair in Emma's office, the afternoon sun streaming through the windows. The room felt different now, less intimidating, more like a safe harbor. He'd been coming here for weeks, and each session seemed to bring him closer to understanding himself. "How are things with Lily?" Emma asked, her voice gentle. A small smile crossed Jake's face. "Better. Last night we made dinner together. Actually cooked, not just microwaved something." He paused, his eyes softening at the memory. She wanted to learn how to make her mother's lasagna recipe. Emma leaned forward slightly in her chair. "That must have been emotional for you both." "It was. Jake's fingers drummed lightly on the armrest, but not in the way I expected. For the first time, talking about Sarah felt okay, different, like I could remember the good things without drowning in the loss. Emma nodded, her eyes showing understanding. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I know that feeling. When my husband David died, I couldn't even look at his favorite coffee mug for months." Jake looked up, surprised by her openness. Usually, Emma kept their sessions focused on him. This felt different. "How did you—" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "How did you start moving forward?" Emma's hands clasped together in her lap. "Honestly, I threw myself into my work, started this program, thought if I could help enough people, maybe it would fill the void." She gave a small, sad laugh. "It didn't, of course. Nothing really does." "But you kept going," Jake said softly. "I did, though sometimes I wonder if I've really moved forward at all." Emma's admission hung in the air between them. "Being here, helping others, it gives me purpose. But personally," she shook her head, "I've been stuck." Jake felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "You're not stuck. Look at everything you've built here. Look at how many people you've helped." He gestured to himself. "Look at me. 3 months ago, I could barely talk about any of this." Emma's eyes met his, vulnerable in a way he'd never seen before. "Sometimes it's easier to help others heal than to face our own pain." "I know that feeling too well," Jake admitted. He shifted in his chair, leaning forward. "But you taught me something important, that healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning to carry the weight differently." Emma's eyes glistened slightly. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." Jake's voice was warm with genuine appreciation. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the office floor. Jake noticed how the light caught the silver pendant Emma always wore. He'd never realized before that it might have been from her husband. "Can I tell you something?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, watching as she gathered her thoughts. "Sometimes I feel guilty for wanting to be happy again," she confessed. "Like moving forward means I'm betraying David's memory somehow." Jake felt his throat tighten with recognition. "I used to think the same thing about Sarah. Still do sometimes. But then I look at Lily." He paused, collecting his thoughts. "She deserves to see that life can be good again. Maybe we both do." Emma wiped at her eyes quickly. "It's funny, isn't it? How we can know something intellectually but still struggle with it emotionally. That's what you always tell me. Healing isn't linear." Jake smiled slightly. "Maybe you should take your own advice sometimes." Emma laughed softly, the sound brightening the room. "Maybe I should." "Thank you," Jake said after a moment, "for trusting me with this. For everything, really." "Thank you for reminding me that vulnerability goes both ways," Emma replied. "Sometimes the therapist needs reminding too." They shared a look of deep understanding, one that spoke of shared pain, but also shared hope. Jake felt something shift inside him, a recognition that healing wasn't just about processing trauma or managing PTSD. It was about opening your heart to new possibilities, even when it scared you. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Outside, a bird sang, its melody drifting through the window. Jake realized that for the first time in years, he felt truly present in a moment, not haunted by the past or anxious about the future. Emma glanced at the clock on her desk, then back at Jake. Her eyes were clearer now, though still soft with emotion. "Our time is almost up." Jake nodded, but neither of them moved immediately. There was something precious about this moment of shared vulnerability, this mutual understanding that had grown between them. It wasn't just about therapy anymore. It was about two people who had found an unexpected connection through their shared experiences of loss and healing. As Jake stood to leave, he felt lighter somehow, not because his burdens had disappeared, but because he now knew with certainty that he wasn't carrying them alone. He saw the same knowledge reflected in Emma's eyes, a recognition that sometimes the best healing happens when we allow ourselves to be both strong and vulnerable, both helper and helped. Jake stared at the email on his sand phone screen, his hand trembling slightly. The message was from his old squad leader, inviting him to a unit reunion next weekend. His stomach tightened as memories flooded back, some good, many painful. In his mechanic shop, the familiar smell of oil and metal usually brought comfort, but now it felt suffocating. He set down the wrench he'd been holding and wiped his greasy hands on a nearby rag, trying to steady his breathing. Later that day, during his session with Emma, Jake sat in his usual spot, the invitation weighing heavily on his mind. "I got an email today," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "From my old unit. They're having a reunion." Emma watched him carefully, noting the tension in his shoulders. "How do you feel about that?" Jake ran a hand through his hair, a nervous habit he'd developed. Honestly, terrified. But also, he paused, searching for the right words. Maybe a little curious? "Tell me more about that curiosity," Emma encouraged, her voice steady and reassuring. "Some of these guys, we went through hell together." Jake's eyes fixed on a point somewhere beyond the office walls. "There's Martinez, who saved my life in Kandahar. Thompson, who used to make us laugh even on the worst days. I haven't seen them since." His voice trailed off. "Since you came home," Emma finished softly. Jake nodded. "I've been avoiding them, avoiding everything from that time. But lately, I've been thinking maybe running isn't the answer anymore." Emma leaned forward slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Working with you, I've learned that facing things head-on, it's hard, but it helps." He met her eyes. "Like when we talked about Sarah's death, I thought avoiding those memories would make the pain less, but it just made everything worse." The reunion could be an opportunity to confront some of those memories in a controlled environment. "But Jake," she added, her expression serious, "you need to be prepared for the gripped emotions it might bring up." "I know." Jake's fingers drummed nervously on the armrest. "What if I have another episode? What if I can't handle it?" "You're not the same person you were when you first walked into my office," Emma reminded him. "You have tools now. You know how to ground yourself, how to manage triggers." Jake thought about the breathing exercises they'd practiced, the coping strategies they'd developed. "Would you—" He hesitated, then continued. "Would you be available that day? By phone, I mean. Just in case?" "Of course," Emma replied without hesitation. "Day or night." The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Jake worked on his cars, trying to keep his hands busy and his mind focused. Lily noticed his distraction and offered her own form of support, leaving little encouraging notes in his lunchbox and giving him extra tight hugs before school. The morning of the reunion arrived crisp and clear. Jake stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt. His reflection showed a man different from the one who'd first sought Emma's help. There was still worry in his eyes, but also determination. The reunion was being held at a local veterans hall, a modest building with American flags flying out front. Jake sat in his truck for several minutes, gripping the steering wheel, using the breathing techniques Emma had taught him. "You can do this," he muttered to himself, echoing words she'd said to him many times. The hall was already half full when he walked in. The familiar faces hit him like a physical force, older now, some with gray hair, but still unmistakably his brothers in arms. Martinez was the first to spot him. "Thompson!" the shorter man called out, making his way through the crowd. "You actually came, you son of a gun." Jake felt his throat tighten as Martinez pulled him into a bear hug. The contact was both comforting and overwhelming. More faces appeared: Wilson, Rodriguez, Stevens, each greeting him with the warmth of shared experience. They settled at a table, and the stories started flowing. Some were lighter moments, pranks pulled during training, jokes shared during long nights on watch. But inevitably, the conversation turned to harder memories. "Remember that night in Kandahar?" someone asked. And Jake felt his chest constrict. The fluorescent lights of the hall seemed to flicker, threatening to transform into the muzzle flashes of that terrible night. His hands began to shake, and sweat beaded on his forehead. But this time, instead of letting the flashback take over, Jake remembered Emma's words. He focused on his breathing. 5 counts in, 5 counts out. He grounded himself by feeling the solid chair beneath him, the texture of the tablecloth under his fingers. The present slowly came back into focus. The hall, his friends, the safety of home. Martinez must have noticed something because he smoothly changed the subject, launching into a story about his kids' latest adventures. Jake shot him a grateful look, appreciating how his old friend still had his back even now. As the afternoon wore on, Jake found himself relaxing more. Yes, there were difficult moments, but he was handling them. He was facing his past instead of running from it, and somehow that made it less frightening. Looking around at these men who had shared so much with him, Jake realized something important. They all carried their own battles, their own scars, but they were here, supporting each other, just like they had done in combat. When it was time to leave, the goodbyes were different from the last time they'd parted ways. There were promises to keep in touch, genuine this time. Phone numbers were exchanged, and plans were made for future meetups. Back in his truck, Jake sat quietly for a moment. His hands were steady on the wheel now. The memories were still there, but they felt less like open wounds and more like healing scars. He'd faced one of his biggest fears today, and while it hadn't been easy, he'd made it through. He pulled out his phone and typed a quick message to Emma. "I did it. Thank you." Then he started the engine, ready to head home to Lily and tell her about the brave men and women he'd served with, finally feeling strong enough to share those stories. The morning after the reunion, Jake sat in his kitchen, staring at his untouched coffee. The mug had gone cold hours ago. Sunlight filtered through the window, but he barely noticed it. His mind kept replaying fragments from the previous night. The faces of old comrades, stories of battles fought, memories of those who never made it home. The reunion had started well enough. He'd managed to keep his composure through the initial greetings and small talk. But then someone had shown a video compilation, complete with explosions and gunfire from their time overseas. The sounds had triggered something deep inside him, sending him spiraling into a panic attack right there in front of everyone. Jake pushed back from the table, his chair scraping against the floor. He couldn't shake the shame of breaking down in front of his old unit. These were men he'd served with, fought alongside, and now they'd seen him at his weakest. The thought made his chest tighten. His phone buzzed for the 3rd time that morning. Emma's name flashed on the screen. He let it go to voicemail, just like the previous calls. She'd been there last night, had helped him through the worst of the panic attack, but now he couldn't bear to face her. The concern in her eyes, the gentleness of her touch, too much. It all felt like too much. Lily's footsteps echoed down the hallway. "Dad?" she called out, her voice tentative. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he responded, his voice rougher than he intended. Just give me some space, honey." He heard her hesitate outside the kitchen door, then slowly retreat. The guilt of pushing her away added another layer to his already overwhelming shame. Hours passed. Jake moved from the kitchen to his bedroom, drawing the curtains tight against the afternoon sun. His phone continued to buzz periodically. Emma, Lily's school, even some of his old unit members checking in. He ignored them all. The darkness in his room matched his mood. Every time he closed his eyes, the memories came rushing back, not just from the reunion, but from his time in service. The explosions, the screams, the weight of responsibility for his men, it all felt as fresh as if it had happened yesterday. By evening, his isolation had become a fortress. When Lily knocked on his door around dinner time, he couldn't bring himself to answer. "Dad?" Her voice cracked slightly. "I made some sandwiches. Can I bring you one?" "Not hungry," he mumbled, loud enough for her to hear. Just go eat yours." The silence that followed was deafening. He could picture her standing there, hurt and confused, trying to understand why her father had withdrawn so completely. Finally, he heard her soft footsteps moving away. His phone buzzed again. Emma's text message appeared on the screen. "Jake, I know you're struggling. What happened at the reunion doesn't erase all the progress you've made. Please don't shut us out. Let me help." He read the message 3 times before tossing the phone aside. The words "progress you've made" felt like a mockery now. What progress? One triggering event, and he was right back where he started, hiding in the dark, unable to face the world. The night grew deeper. Through his bedroom wall, he could hear Lily watching TV in the living room, the volume turned down low. She was trying to be considerate, even though he'd been anything but. Another wave of guilt washed over him. Around midnight, another text came through from Emma. "I'm here when you're ready." "You're stronger than you think." Jake sat in his armchair, surrounded by darkness, feeling anything but strong. The panic attack at the reunion played on repeat in his mind. The trembling hands, the cold sweat, the struggle to breathe. He thought he was getting better, thought he was finally gaining control over his PTSD. Now it felt like he'd been fooling himself all along. His wedding ring caught what little moonlight filtered through the curtains. He twisted it on his finger, thinking of his late wife, wondering what she would say if she could see him now. Would she be disappointed in how he was handling things? In how he was treating their daughter? Another gentle knock at his door. "Dad?" Lily's voice was small, worried. "I'm going to bed now. I love you." The words pierced through his self-imposed isolation, but he couldn't bring himself to respond. He heard her linger for a moment before walking away, her footsteps heavy with disappointment. Alone in the darkness, Jake felt the full weight of his failure pressing down on him. He'd failed his old unit by breaking down at the reunion. He was failing Lily by shutting her out. He was failing Emma by refusing her help. Most of all, he was failing himself by letting his demons win again. The clock on his nightstand ticked away the minutes. Outside, the world continued turning, but in his darkened room, Jake remained frozen in his despair. The walls he'd worked so hard to lower with Emma's help now stood higher than ever, reinforced by shame and fear. His phone lit up one final time, this stud, another message from Emma. He didn't read it. Instead, he sat in his armchair, staring into the darkness, feeling more lost and alone than he had in months. The progress he'd made, the hope he'd started to feel, the connections he'd begun to rebuild, it all seemed like a distant dream now, replaced by the familiar company of his demons. Jake sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. The morning sun cast long shadows across the worn linoleum floor, highlighting the dust particles dancing in the air. His daughter Lily stood in the doorway, her backpack slung over one shoulder, watching him with worried eyes. "Dad?" Her voice was soft, tentative. "Are you okay?" Jake looked up, trying to force a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." Lily set her backpack down and pulled out a chair across from him. The scraping sound made him flinch slightly, but he managed to keep his composure. "You don't look fine," she said, her eyes searching his face. "You haven't been fine since the reunion." The perceptiveness in her young voice caught him off guard. Sometimes he forgot how observant she was, how much she picked up on his moods and struggles. Jake's throat tightened as he considered deflecting, pushing her away like he had been doing for days. But something in her earnest expression made him pause. "You're right," he admitted quietly. "I haven't been fine." Lily reached across the table and placed her small hand over his. "Is it because of the bad memories, like Dr. Emma talks about?" Jake nodded slowly, his vision blurring slightly. "Yeah, sweetie. The reunion, seeing everyone again. It brought back a lot of things I thought I'd dealt with. But you were doing so much better," Lily said, her voice carrying a hint of confusion and hurt. "You were smiling more. We were doing things together." The pain in her voice cut through him like a knife. Jake pulled his hand away and ran it through his hair, struggling to find the right words. "I know, and I'm sorry. Sometimes. Sometimes it feels like I take one step forward and 2 steps back. I get scared that I'll never be the father you deserve." "But you are," Lily insisted, her eyes welling with tears. "You're my dad. I don't need you to be perfect. I just need you to be here." The simple truth in her words struck him deeply. Jake felt something crack inside him, a wall he'd built up starting to crumble. "I'm scared, Lily," he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I'm scared that these memories, these feelings, they'll never go away. that I'll always be broken. Lily got up from her chair and walked around the table. Without hesitation, she wrapped her arms around him in a tight hug. You're not broken, Dad. You're just hurt. And that's okay. We can figure it out together. Jake held his daughter close, feeling the unconditional love in her embrace. For so long, he'd been trying to protect her from his pain, thinking he needed to be strong all the time. But here she was, showing him that real strength sometimes meant being vulnerable. I love you so much, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry I've been pushing you away. I love you too, Dad, Lily said, her face pressed against his shoulder. And I'm not going anywhere. Neither is Dr. Emma. We both want to help you. At the mention of Emma's name, Jake felt a flutter of shame for how he'd been avoiding her calls. But mixed with the shame was a spark of determination. His daughter's unwavering support and love reminded him why he'd started this journey in the first place. You know what? He said, pulling back slightly to look at Lily's face. You're right. I can't give up now. Not when I've come this far. Lily's face brightened. Really? You'll go back to seeing Dr. Emma? Jake nodded, feeling more certain with each passing moment. Yeah, I will. I need to keep fighting, for both of us. Later that day, Jake sat in Emma's office, the familiar surroundings, both comforting and intimidating. Emma listened patiently as he explained his absence and described the conversation with Lily. It sounds like your daughter has quite a lot of wisdom, Emma said softly, her expression understanding. Jake smiled slightly, thinking of Lily's words. She does. She helped me see that I've been so focused on being perfect that I forgot it's okay to struggle sometimes, as long as I keep trying. That's a powerful realization, Emma noted. What do you want to do with that understanding? Jake sat up straighter in his chair, feeling more focused than he had in days. I want to keep working on myself. The reunion showed me I still have a lot to process, but I'm ready to face it. I need to, for Lily, and for myself. Emma nodded approvingly. That's a healthy perspective, Jake. Remember, healing isn't linear. There will be setbacks, but what matters is how we respond to them. I know that now, Jake said, his voice steady. I'm tired of letting my past control my future. I want to be present for my daughter, to be the father she deserves, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to get there. Jake watched the early morning sunlight dance across his windshield as he drove down the familiar country road, Lily humming softly beside him. His hands were steady on the steering wheel, a small detail he couldn't help but notice. The tremors that had plagued him for so long were becoming less frequent now. Where are we going, Dad? Lily asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. Somewhere special, Jake replied, a gentle smile tugging at his lips. Somewhere your mom and I used to take you when you were little. The old dirt road led them to Highland Point, a peaceful overlook that stretched across the valley. As Jake parked the truck, memories washed over him, not with the usual sting of pain, but with a bittersweet warmth that felt almost healing. They walked together along the well-worn path, their footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. Jake watched as Lily ran ahead, her pigtails bouncing with each step, and felt his heart swell with love and gratitude. I remember this place, Lily called out, spinning around with her arms outstretched. Mom used to pack those peanut butter and banana sandwiches, and we'd have picnics right here. Jake nodded, settling down on their old favorite spot, a large, flat rock that overlooked the valley below. That's right. You were probably only 4 or 5 at the time. Lily sat beside him, leaning into his side. Jake wrapped an arm around her, shoulders pulling her close. The contact no longer made him tense or anxious. Instead, it felt natural, right. Tell me more about Mom, Lily said softly. The happy stuff. Jake took a deep breath, feeling the familiar tightness in his chest begin to ease. Well, your mom loved this spot because she said it made her feel like she could see forever. She'd pack those sandwiches, even though I told her peanut butter and banana was a weird combination. Lily giggled. But they're the best. That's exactly what she would say. Jake smiled, the memory warming him. She'd bring her old Polaroid camera too, always wanting to capture every moment. From his jacket pocket, Jake pulled out a slightly worn photograph. It showed a younger version of himself, holding a toddler Lily while his wife Sarah beamed at the camera. The three of them sat on this very same rock, the valley stretching endlessly behind them. "I found this the other day," he said, handing it to Lily. "Thought you might like to have it." Lily traced the edges of the photograph with gentle fingers. "We look so happy." "We were," Jake said, his voice steady. "And you know what? We can be happy again, just in a different way. It's taken me a long time to understand that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching as clouds drifted lazily across the sky. Jake felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years, like the jagged edges of his grief were finally starting to smooth. "Dad?" Lily's voice was thoughtful. "I'm proud of you." Jake looked down at her, surprised. "Proud of me? Why's that?" "Because you're trying so hard to get better. I know it's not easy, but you're doing it anyway." She squeezed his hand. "And I can tell it's working. You smile more now." Jake felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I'm trying, kiddo, for both of us. Dr. Emma's helped a lot, hasn't she?" "She has," Jake agreed. "She's helped me understand that it's okay to miss Mom and still move forward. That healing doesn't mean forgetting." Lily nodded wisely. "Like how we can make new happy memories here, but still remember the old ones too?" "Exactly like that." Jake pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. "When did you get so smart?" They spent the rest of the morning there, sharing stories and making plans for the future. Lily talked about her upcoming science fair project, and Jake found himself fully engaged, offering suggestions and support. They discussed summer vacation possibilities and even planned to plant a garden in the spring, something Sarah had always wanted to do. Later that afternoon, Jake sat across from Emma in her office. The familiar space felt different now, less clinical and more comforting. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the edges of Emma's smile as she listened to Jake recount his morning with Lily. "It sounds like a breakthrough moment," Emma said warmly. "How did it feel to share those memories with her?" Jake leaned back in his chair, considering. "It felt right. Like I was finally able to honor Sarah's memory without getting lost in the pain of losing her." Emma nodded encouragingly. "That's significant progress, Jake. You've come so far in these past months." "The program you've built here, it's changing lives," Jake said earnestly. "Not just mine. I see it in the other veterans too." "Speaking of the program," Emma began, her eyes lighting up, "the funding from the fundraiser has secured us for another year. We're even looking at expanding our services." Jake felt a surge of pride and purpose. "Count me in for whatever you need. Maybe I could even speak to some of the newer veterans, share my experience." "I think that would be incredibly valuable," Emma agreed. "Your journey could give others hope." As they discussed the future of the program, Jake felt a deep sense of contentment settle over him. The weight he'd carried for so long hadn't disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into something manageable, something that no longer threatened to crush him. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I used to think healing meant getting back to who I was before everything happened, but that's not it at all, is it?" Emma shook her head. "What do you think it means now?" "It means learning to be who I am now, scars and all. It means being present for Lily, honoring Sarah's memory, and still being able to look forward to tomorrow." What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Jake Thompson, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.